My name is Kristin Gulbrandsen Frøysa, and I am Energy Director at the University of Bergen. Today, we will have 4 presentations from staff at UIB, addressing legal aspects of Sørlige, Nordsjø 2 and Utsira Nord, and also the wind resources and the geological site. So, by that, I would like to just hand over the word to Sigrid Eskeland Schütz, who will start the presentation.
Thank you very much, Kristin. Sigrid Schütz, Faculty of Law. I will give a short introduction. Where are we now in the consultation process on this proposed division of the opened areas of Sørlige Nordsjø 2 and Utsira Nord? And the background is, of course, the press conference on the 9th of February this year from the Minister of Petroleum and Energy, where we had our Minister, Marte Mjøs Persen, presenting the plans for the opened areas, and later on she is now replaced by Terje Aasland, and Persen is the Minister of Labour and Social Inclusion. In this presentation, they gave an overview over what is happening under this government's plans for the offshore wind sector. And as you remember, this is the overview over the Ocean Energy Act. We had the opening process for areas offshore for production of wind, and 2 areas are now opened. That is Utsira Nord and Sørlige Nordsjø 2. Both areas are too large to have only one wind park, so they need to be further delimited to have more production sites within each area. So where are we now? We are now on the phase of a public hearing announced on this press conference of the proposal for how to divide these areas further. And you can now come with your input on this proposed division. I'll return to that in a minute. With the deadline for this public hearing on the 29th of April this year. And then after this deadline, the ministry will decide upon how to divide or design these further proposed production areas in the opened areas. So let's see, take a look at Utsira Nord first. That is an area not far from Bergen, outside the municipality of Utsira, the island Utsira. It's for floating offshore wind. And as you could see, in the most northern part of the area, it is an area for marine or military training field. That is on the right-hand alternative. So there are 2 alternatives how to divide this Utsira Nord floating area. We could just take a look at the picture at the upper hand left first, where you could see that this area has a lot of traffic, marine traffic. So there was an update on the traffic situation in the area, and it's on the picture below. You could see the red fields where it's the proposal is to avoid this area due to the marine traffic. So if we look at the 2 alternatives that are now proposed in this public hearing, Alternative 1 and Alternative 2. Alternative 2 is with this military training field in the upper left hand, which needs to be replaced in order to use Alternative 1. It will probably be moved to Halten, so the military training field will then not be a part of the plan. But if it's supposed to be a military training field there, then there will be 3 areas for opened for allocation. If not, there will be 4 as in Alternative 1. which is the most realistic as I read the documents. In between these four supposed proposed areas in Alternative 1, there are buffer zones. It's the dark blue areas, buffer zones for wind turbulence between the wind parks. So it's approximately 5 kilometers proposed buffer zones. So there will be proposed 4 areas in Alternative 1, 2 with 500 megawatts approximately capacity, and 2 with together 500 in these 2 small areas, approximately 250 then in each. For Sørlige Nordsjø 2, Southern North Sea 2, the marine traffic is not such a problem because it's situated more offshore, and you could plan your marine traffic on beforehand. So this is not a concern, so to speak. So there is no area for marine traffic. The spawning area for towbies, which is on the right-hand picture, these dark green fields are kept out of the area. So they are protected under this proposal. And there are 3 areas for production, and 2 will be allocated in this phase 1 of Sørlige Nordsjø 2. What next? The next phase under the regulation as it is proposed is a pre-qualification phase where different stakeholders will be evaluated, and then there will be this decision on the regulation and changes in the legislation before we have the allocation of the areas. And just to sum up, an important clarification also is that if we look at Sørlige Nordsjø 2, for instance, an area called A here, we could also see that in the text in the document, it is stated that if this area is designed under the environmental impact assessment to be in this area, then the developer needs to give up the rest of the allocated area under the auction. So he has gained area A under the auction, designed his project as shown in this picture, and then he needs to give up the rest of the area. A bit unclear then what could happen in this area. So that was, Kristen, I think my 7 minutes. So I leave the floor to the next speaker, and I'll close this presentation.
Thank you very much, Sigrid, and I'm sure there will also be questions for you after your presentation or in the Q&A session. The next speaker is also coming from the law faculty. That's Ignacio Herrera Anchustegui, and he will talk about subsea cables. So please, Ignacio.
Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what is going on with the cables in Sørlige Nordsjø 2. And this is a bit of a contentious topic, just straight from the bat. I don't have any hard feelings when it comes to cables or no cables. I want to present what is currently the situation at the moment. So the first thing is cables are not new. We have had cables in Norway for a while. This is a picture from 2019, and it is showing that we have already cables for import and export of electricity with Sweden, also Finland, and we even have a connection here in the part in the north with Russia, plus other connections that we have had historically with Denmark and Germany and so on and so forth. And we have had several of them. Cables have been more or less contentious, particularly if they are built offshore, but we see that we have them already. And since 2019, we have had 2 large cables, so it is an update of the previous picture. Both of them enter into play in 2021. One of them goes to Germany, that is called Nordlink, and it's owned by Statnett and Tenet, which is one of the German's TSO, so the transmission system organizer. And it is a 500 kilometers long cable with 1.4 megawatt as capacity, operational in March 2021. And then we have another cable also built and operational in October 2021, connecting Norway and the UK. Same capacity, even longer, about the same costs. So we already have cables exporting electricity, regardless if we build or not cables in offshore wind projects. But as we just been hearing from my colleague Sigrid, we have two areas that have been open, and one of them, the one that I'm focusing, is on Sørlige Nordsjø 2, located right at the border with Denmark. And here we see already different companies and different stakeholders saying, we have problems here connected to one decision that has been made, and that decision is that it is not desired, and the government has stressed this point, that they do not want cables that go from Sørlige Nordsjø 2 to another country, but only cables that go into Norway. So what we have seen is that in the previous times with the previous government in 2021, there seemed to be a consensus by the current government of Solberg and some different entities that it might not be a bad idea to develop cables that were coming from Sørlige Nordsjø 2 to connect it to other countries but Norway. However, with the new government, and we hear in February that they want to develop these two areas, but they do not want cables. They do not want hybrid cables. These are the cables that will connect to Norway and somewhere else. And as you see here, cables are supposed to go in Sørlige Nordsjø 2 only to Norway. And what we see here is that in 2022, they decide to split these areas, and very clearly they say, we do not want to have export cables. We do not have an interest for having hybrid solutions, because the idea, according to the current government, is to have low electricity prices for the people in Norway. And whenever we build up cables that are going to be somewhere else, we are also going to be increasing export capacity. And in principle, this is going to mean less electricity for Norway, higher prices too. So how can the government decide whether they want cables or not? And then you can set up this in the licensing documents or in the conditions that are going to be made for the bids to happen. And in this case, the government can state, we do not want any kind of solutions that have cables that are hybrid or only for export. This is a decision that it rests entirely on the government as they plan the auction system or the opening of the area. Hav Energilova does not have any preference for cables or not. Then another entity that is very famous in Norway, that is the one that you use to scare children in bad times of the year, ACER, has absolutely nothing to do with whether you build or not cables, because it's a purely national decision that I think needs to be considered with other aspects and solutions, such as, for example, the need for electrification, but at the same time, who is going to be paying for the electricity in the end? So the question is this a good idea? The argument is that Norway needs more power. We are electrifying. We are increasing more the use of electricity. We are introducing electricity into new sectors. And traditionally, power in Norway has been cheap. However, you're probably paying your electricity bill in this country. And even if you're not paying it in Norway, the prices are extremely high compared to 2020. These are exceptional years. Usually the price is going to be much lower, 30 to 40 øre per kilowatt hour. The question is whether 2021 or 2022 are going to be exceptional and the prices will be higher. If you develop export cables, it makes opportunities for investment in principle more attractive, because if power is relatively cheap in Norway, you could sell power somewhere else. And in that sense, we see that if there's possibility to export electricity, then you will require less public support to be developing defense solutions for Norway, because the question is, who will build this infrastructure if you are not able to make your money back? And here we have it here. This is the estimate that has been given, about 78 øre, while your normal price is 30 to 40. You're losing money every time that you produce energy, but maybe if you sell it to the UK, you might not lose less. The questions on whether cables are good or bad idea is not a black and white answer. It all depends on the effect of the cable, the size of the cable, and the prices in the system. And we have seen in the Energy Lab, the prices can go up or down. As already mentioned, export power cables exist. And the fact is that electricity, even if it only comes to Norway, will also be exported through the cables that we already have. So what we're seeing is that we're perhaps minimizing the capacity that will be to export, but export will be existing. And if we're going to have electricity that is very expensive, and it's only imported to Norway, who is going to be paying this electricity? It's going to be you and me in the end. And this is going to be also connected to the fact whether this project will be subsidized or not. The government has said that they will not like to subsidize projects that will build on Utsira Nord. And if you don't subsidize, can you do these projects without the cables, or you will need to do a subsidization in order to be able to do something about the fact that they might not be profitable to sell power, or therefore will not come in. So the question is whether this is going to be profitable or not, and I think this is going to be answered when we see in the end the conditions for the application and the license and how this is going to be taken further.
Thank you very much. So we then switch to Professor Joachim Reuder from Geophysical Institute at University of Bergen, and you will talk about the wind resources in this area.
Basically, what I would like to convey today is that Norway has this very, very good wind resources depicted here on the figure on the left-hand side. The more orange and red and brown the colors are, the better the wind conditions. And we can see that all over Norway along the coast has very, very good conditions. And if we look on the view graph to the right, then the potential of wind energy globally seen, Norway is one of the countries with the highest potential due to this very, very long shoreline in very good wind conditions. But we also see most of this is deep water and might favor floating concepts in the future. If we now zoom in a little bit into the area we are interested in, again, Utsira Nord here and Sørlige Nordsjø, then we see also on this picture that the average wind speeds we can expect are in the order of maybe between 9.5 and 10 meters per second for Utsira Nord, and above 10 meters per second for Sørlige Nordsjø. And if we analyze this a little bit more in the classical view of a windrose, then we see here for Sørlige Nordsjø, I will focus on that here in my talk today. We have a mean wind speed of 10.5 meters per second. Those data are taken from the NORA 3 hindcast. This is a product that is available now for 18 years from 2002 to 2020 and gives you informations on the state of the atmosphere in a resolution of 3 kilometers. And we have a wind speed of 10.5 meters per second. We can see here north or westerlies are prevailing. And we have rather little northeasterlies at the site of Sørlige Nordsjø. And if we look at it on this Weibull distribution here, so the occurrence of different wind speeds, we get the curve and the Weibull fit with the parameters that are very interesting for the people doing the resource assessment. Etienne Chenet here at our institute did a preliminary calculation for this 18 years of NORA data, and assuming that we could use this 5 megawatt NREL turbine, we could reach a capacity factor of slightly above 60% at the location Sørlige Nordsjø, and this is an excellent value. at the moment, I think an average value for offshore turbines, offshore wind farms in capacity factor is maybe in the order of 40 to 45%. And I also want to convey today the message that it's not only the wind speed that is important, we also have to look into the stability. And again, this reanalysis data sets can give us information on the stability. And the stability in this case is now calculated in a very rough manner. Is the temperature difference between the air temperature and the sea surface temperature, and then the wind speed and wind direction at 100 meters. For a wind speed range between 5 and 25 meters, so we cut everything that the turbine would not be interested in away. And the blue colors here indicate stable conditions, and the red colors unstable conditions. And yeah, if we have a look in general how stability affects the wind profiles, then we see stable conditions create a large wind shear, which, when we look on the right-hand side, looks like to have a positive effect on the power curve, but it has a negative and adverse effect on the loads. You can imagine every blade undergoes a lot of movements during every rotation, while in unstable conditions we have relatively little wind shear. But it turns out that in a very turbulent atmosphere, in convective conditions, the turbine produces usually less energy compared to the neutral conditions or the power curve that is given by the producers. So and in very extreme cases of stable conditions, so maybe we can see this darker blue rim around here, we typically have this so-called low-level jets, where we have a wind maximum in altitudes that are now easily reached by modern offshore wind turbines when we are talking about 10, 12, or 14 megawatt in the future. They will reach easily 300 meters, and we can expect that these peaks in the wind speed will have a considerable effect on those turbines. And these are measurements from Fino 1 and the German Byte. And their low-level jets tend to occur in around 15 to 20% of all cases. And looking at this stability rows here once again, we can expect maybe similar numbers for the situation in both Sørlige and Nordsjø and also at Utsira. And I think with that I will stop and give the word back to Kristin.
Thank you very much, Joachim. The last speaker giving introduction today is Christian Haug Eide from the Department of Geology at UIB. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kristin. So I'm very happy to talk to you today, and I will be talking about seabed conditions for anchors and foundations for offshore wind on NCS. And maybe in contrast to the other speakers today, we haven't done a lot of work on this topic in Norway yet. So this is an ongoing project. We have one small project funded through the academia agreement, and then we have an application for a much bigger project that is being considered by the Research Council right now. So now I will talk to you about the things we know, the things we don't know, and some concepts. And if you look at a map of the seabed on the Norwegian continental shelf, you can see Utsira Nord here and Sørlige Nordsjø 2 here. And you can see that it's not only the depth that is different, but you can also see that the morphology of the seafloor is completely different for this place and for this place, and also for future sites. For instance, Stadhavet and Frøybanken, the geological conditions there are completely different from the conditions we have on the existing sites. So that's something to consider. Okay, so if we look at a world map showing wind resources, the more red, the better the wind resources are. Norway and the North Sea is here. We also see that on this map we have this blue overlay on some northern parts of the world. And these are the areas that were overlain by glaciers during the last glacial maximum about 20,000 years ago. And if you're going to anchor, for instance, an oil platform, you can spend a lot of money and a lot of time on designing your anchors and your foundations. But for offshore wind, you have a large number of structures per unit of energy, and therefore the foundations contribute significantly to the cost of wind farms. So therefore you need to know quite a lot about the soil and the rock at and below the seabed in order to plan how you're going to anchor or foundation your wind farm. And these things, they drive costs. And because the North Sea has been covered by glaciers, this is a place of very complex geology. So I will show you this animation. This is a simulation made by Henry Patton in Tromsø, and it shows the growth of the Norwegian and British ice sheets during the last parts of the last ice age. And here we can see that Utsira Nord is here, Sørlige Nordsjø 2 is here, and as these ice sheets are growing, the sea level goes down, so the Sørlige Nordsjø 2 site becomes dry land at times, while Utsira Nord is located in an ice stream where the glaciers are eroding deeply into the substrate, making these sites very complicated and very different. Glaciers, they can erode or over-consolidate the sediments underneath them, and they can also deposit new and very heterogeneous deposits. So for instance, it's typical for glaciers to deposit clays with big rocks in them. This is a problem when you're trying to anchor things. For instance, if you're using a suction anchor like this, you want to put this down into the soil, and you want to make a vacuum so that this stays stuck to the seabed. But in some cases, icebergs can bring out large amounts of rock, and when these icebergs melt or turn, they can drop these rocks. And if you have deposits like this, it's extremely difficult to make a suction anchor like this, both go through this and also achieve a good vacuum. So knowing the seabed conditions, knowing what kind of heterogeneities you can have in the soils, and knowing how to avoid places where you have these types of heterogeneities can save you a lot of money. So some of the things that we want to know is, how do the soil properties vary throughout a particular site? How do the soil properties vary from site to site, and how does these properties vary all across the Norwegian continental shelf? And if we know that, we can better plan which areas should be announced for wind farms, and if there's ways to save money or decrease costs when we're trying to divide these areas into separate wind farms. So, and can we predict the geotechnical properties based on geological data and seabed morphology? And is it possible to say something general about what types of anchors and what types of foundations would be suitable for all, or where different solutions would be suitable on the NCS? And how do the different geotechnical problems drive costs? So at the moment, we have one project. We have a PhD student, Hannah Petrie. She has made some of the figures I'm going to show you in some time. And she is the only person working full-time on the geology of offshore wind in Norwegian academia at the moment. Then we have about 15 million KPN application that's being considered by the Norwegian Research Council right now, which involves a lot of the Norwegian institutions relevant for ground conditions for offshore wind, and also some of the big German and UK institutions on this. So we're going on a cruise this summer to acquire data from the Sørlige, Nordsjø 2 and Utsira Nord sites. And if this project is funded, we will acquire much more data and get also train about 15 master students in this very important topic. So I can show you some examples of the work that we have been doing. First, I can show you a map here of the Utsira Nord site. So the blue and purple colors are the deepest, and you see Utsira here. You see that there are some rock outcrops at the seabed, these peaks down here, but this will likely not be part of the announced sites because of the traffic is quite great there. And Hannah, her first paper in her PhD, it was just accepted and it will be out in a final version probably in April, but you can get the preprint here if you're quick to take a picture of the link here. And she has identified that the main geological heterogeneities on the Utsira Nord site is that we have 4 different types of geological layers that would require different types of anchoring solutions. And we can see that this unit 2 here, which is deposited just underneath a moving glacier and is highly deformed by the glacier, it makes up most of the site, and we can see that most anchor types would be contained within this unit. But as we go north on the site, this unit becomes thinner, and we have a unit below that is much harder and has a much higher probability of having big blocks and boulders that create anchoring problems. So we think that that would be the greatest uncertainty on this site. And one of the objectives in the cruise this summer is to go out and acquire core data so that we know exactly what types of conditions we're dealing with here and how they would influence anchoring solutions. On the Sørlige Nordsjø 2 site, the conditions are quite different. Here we have a depth of about 60 meters in contrast to 270 meters on the Utsira Nord site. And on this site, we have a lot of 3D seismic data that was originally acquired for hydrocarbon exploration, but now we can use those same data to investigate the conditions at the seabed. So here we can see that the 3 main heterogeneities on the Sørlige Nordsjø 2 site is that we have a sandy seabed in most of the area, but some places we have these old river channels from when the site was dry land, and we believe that these are much softer and much more difficult to anchor in or have foundations in than the sandier soils next to it. We also have subglacial tunnel valleys, which we don't know much about yet until we get data from the cruise this summer. And we have salt diapirs in the subsurface, and over them we have shallow gas. So these are the main unknowns on the 2 sites, Utsira Nord and Sørlige Nordsjø 2. But it's also important to note that when these other sites have been considered, geology has never been part of the selection criteria. So in some places we see that we have sites with strongly different conditions across the site, so maybe it would make sense to develop this deeper part in another way than this shallow part. Yeah, so these are our cruise plans. This is the cruise we're going to do, and these are the 3 cruises that will be part of the proposed projects, but I don't think we can spend more time on this. So to conclude, the geological and geotechnical conditions on NCS are complex, mainly because of glacial erosion and deposition, and it's important to know what the geology is like in order to figure out which types of anchors you should use and how these anchors should be defined. There are strong variations in geological conditions within each site and also between the different sites. There's not much research going on the geology of offshore wind in Norway at the moment, but we hope much more will take place. And our upcoming cruises will hopefully answer many key unknowns and will train many students. Yes, so that is everything I had to tell you today.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very important topic, and as you said, it has not been included in the previous assessments of these areas.